I helped my veteran neighbor repair his fence. Then he said, "There's someone I want you to meet." The first thing my 78-year-old neighbor ever asked me for wasn't a cup of sugar or a ride into town. It was a hammer. I remember looking over my backyard fence that Saturday morning, coffee still in my hand, when I heard his rough voice. "Ethan, you still know how to swing one of these?" I laughed. "I think so." He smiled. "Then quit standing there and come help me." I had no idea that simple invitation would completely change my life. When I bought my little house on Maple Street, I wasn't looking for friends. I was looking for silence. 6 months earlier, my fiancé had ended our relationship only 3 weeks before our wedding. Everything we'd planned disappeared overnight. The apartment, the honeymoon, the future I'd spent years imagining. So I moved to a quiet neighborhood where nobody knew my story. Next door lived Walter Dawson, retired Army veteran, 78 years old, always awake before sunrise, always mowing his lawn on Thursdays, always drinking black coffee on the porch at exactly 7 every morning. We weren't close, just neighbors who waved, until the storm. A huge thunderstorm rolled through town one Friday night. Trees came down everywhere. The next morning, Walter's wooden fence had completely collapsed. Several posts had snapped. Boards were scattered across his yard. He stood there with his hands on his hips, staring at the mess. I walked over. "Need some help?" He looked at me for a second. "I was hoping you'd ask." For the next 2 weekends, we worked side by side, digging holes, setting posts. Walter refused to rush anything. "Measure twice," he kept saying. "Fix it once." The man was stubborn, but he worked harder than people half his age. During breaks, we'd sit on overturned buckets drinking lemonade. That's when the conversation started. He told me stories from his Army days. Not exciting action stories, real stories. Missing Christmas, watching young soldiers become family, losing friends, learning how precious ordinary days really are. One afternoon, he looked at me and asked, "So why'd you move here?" I shrugged. Needed a fresh start. He waited. Veterans are patient. They know silence usually finishes the story. Finally, I sighed. My fiancée left. When? About 8 months ago. You still think about her? Every day. Walter nodded slowly. You don't miss her. I frowned. I don't? No. What do I miss then? He tapped the side of his coffee mug. You miss the future you imagined. I stared at him. Nobody had ever explained my feelings that perfectly. He smiled. I've buried enough friends to know the difference. After we finished rebuilding the fence, Walter stood back and admired our work. Looks better than before. I think so. He nodded proudly. Then he turned toward me. Ethan? Yeah? There's someone I want you to meet. I figured he meant another veteran. Instead, he led me inside his house. It was warm, comfortable. Old family photographs covered every wall. One picture caught my attention. Walter stood beside a little girl with missing front teeth. She was sitting on his shoulders, laughing. My granddaughter, he said. She's beautiful. Still is. He walked down the hallway and gently knocked on a closed bedroom door. Emma? No answer. It's Grandpa. A few seconds later, the door slowly opened. A woman around my age stood there. Long brown hair tied loosely into a messy bun. Kind eyes. Oversized sweater. She looked nervous. Very nervous. Emma, Walter said softly, this is Ethan. She gave me a tiny smile. Hi. Before I could say anything else, she quietly stepped back into the room. The door closed. I looked at Walter. Did I do something wrong? He shook his head. No, he sighed. She just hasn't trusted people in a long time. We sat in the living room. Walter stared at the family photos. 3 years ago, Emma was driving home from work. I stayed quiet. A drunk driver crossed the center line. My stomach tightened. She survived. The other driver didn't. Walter looked toward the hallway. His car caught fire. Emma tried to save him, but she couldn't. I didn't know what to say. Ever since then, Walter whispered, she blames herself. Over the next few months, I visited Walter almost every weekend. Sometimes we fixed little things around the house. Sometimes we played chess. Sometimes we simply drank coffee. Emma was almost always there, quiet, watching, listening. Little by little, she started joining our conversations. One afternoon, I noticed she was sketching flowers in a notebook. Those are amazing. She immediately closed it. They're nothing. They're definitely not nothing. She looked embarrassed. I used to sell my artwork. What happened? I stopped drawing. Why? She looked away. I stopped living. That sentence stayed with me for days. After that, I never pushed her. I didn't ask about the accident. I didn't tell her everything would be okay. I simply treated her like a normal person. Eventually, she started asking me questions. About work, about my hobbies, about why I moved here. One evening she asked, "Do you still love your ex?" I thought about it. No. Then why aren't you dating? Because I forgot how. She laughed. It was the first time I'd ever heard her laugh. And honestly, it sounded like someone opening a window after years of keeping it shut. Walter noticed too. One afternoon he smiled while watching us argue over a crossword puzzle. I haven't heard that laugh in years. I smiled. I'm glad it's back. Winter came. Then spring. Emma slowly started leaving the house again. At first she'd only walk around the block. Then we'd go for coffee together. One day she even drove herself to the grocery store. It sounds small, but for her, it was huge. One evening we sat on Walter's porch watching the sunset. Emma asked quietly, "Do you think people deserve second chances?" I do. What if their mistake cost someone a life? I looked at her. The drunk driver made the mistake. She shook her head. I couldn't save him. You tried. I wasn't enough. I took a deep breath. If your positions had been reversed. She looked confused. What do you mean? If you had died and he had tried to save you, would you want him blaming himself forever? She immediately answered, no. Then why are you giving yourself a punishment you'd never give someone else? That's it. She didn't answer. Instead, she cried. Not quietly, not politely. Years of guilt came pouring out. I sat beside her without saying a word. Sometimes that's all people need. Someone willing to stay. A month later, Walter collapsed while trimming his roses. The doctor said his heart was failing. Emma and I spent every day at the hospital. One evening, Walter motioned us closer. I've got something to tell you. We leaned in. He smiled. You two think I introduced you by accident. Emma squeezed his hand. You didn't? He chuckled. No. He looked at me. You'd forgotten how to hope. Then he looked at Emma. You'd forgotten how to live. He smiled. I figured maybe the two of you could remind each other. Those were some of the last clear words he ever spoke. Walter passed away peacefully 3 days later. The entire neighborhood came to his funeral. Veterans stood in perfect formation. A folded American flag was placed into Emma's hands. She held it against her chest and cried. After everyone left, we stood beside Walter's grave. I looked at the sky. We keep going. How? The way he taught us. One day at a time. Over the following year, everything slowly changed. Emma began painting again. Her artwork filled local galleries. People loved her work because every painting carried something impossible to describe. Hope. Not fake happiness. Real hope. The kind earned after surviving pain. I finally stopped living in the past. I started smiling again. laughing again, planning a future again. One Saturday morning, almost exactly a year after Walter's funeral, I noticed one loose board on the fence we'd built together. I grabbed my toolbox. Emma walked outside carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. She smiled. "Need a hand?" I laughed. "I was hoping you'd ask." Together we fixed the board in less than 10 minutes. When we finished, we stood quietly looking at the fence. Emma slipped her hand into mine. "You know?" "What?" "Your grandfather didn't just introduce us." She smiled through happy tears. "He saved both of us." I looked across the backyard. The flowers Walter loved were blooming again. For just a second, I could almost hear his voice. "Measure twice, fix it once." Back then, I thought he was talking about fences. Now I know he was talking about people. Some hearts don't need miracles. They just need someone willing to stay long enough to help rebuild them, one piece at a time.